The man. I can imagine.
Okay, good morning. Just wait 2 minutes or so for Anna to return. Maybe some more people will arrive. Not so bad. It's not so early. It's already light. And it's kind of bizarre that at 7 in the morning it's so dark, but but we're going to revert to something closer to natural time. So the end of when is it? The end of next weekend, perhaps? The end of the daylight saving time. Sorry? The 5th. November. Okay. We'll get back in the morning. Was document.
It's difficult to wake up an hour earlier.
No, the other way around.
Oh, we gain 1 hour more. That we can sleep 1 more hour in, or
Yes.
Oh, that's nice. Sorry, I thought it was reversed.
Yeah.
That's my next season.
Okay, so yes, we should get started. Because we fell behind schedule, we didn't finish Arendt and so that's what we have to do today, and then we talk about Habermas and his theory of communicative action, or which is otherwise his communicative understanding of democracy. ask you to read some passages from his concept of the public sphere. But before we get to Habermas, I have to return to Hannah Arendt. It unorganized my notes last week and didn't manage to finish them. Yeah, let's just get started here, and we are going to sort of jump into the material covered by the science chapters from some text that I've assigned, and have a look in a certain sense at the same problems that I tried to discuss last week from a different perspective. So, as Hannah Arendt, somewhat similarly to Carl Schmitt, and perhaps that was discussed already last week, we were not 100% sure. Among other things, insists that we have somewhat forgotten the real meaning of politics or the political. And part of, and apart from that, she also argues that authentic political action, authentic politics is somehow disappearing from modern world. And part of what it means is what was discussed towards the end of last week's class. Basically had claimed that modern society is getting more and more conformist. It is a man's society. Individuals are basically conditioned to behave as part of a mass, just fulfilling their social functions without acting really freely and spontaneously. And second aspect of what she means, that was also discussed last week, is that when you think about what really shapes, say what shapes history, or what sort of shapes or makes, transforms our world today, here she agrees with her teacher, Martin Heidegger, but also numerous other thinkers from the same period, from 1950s, 1960s, that it is technology. And technology obviously is based on or closely connected, you could also almost say fused with science. Yeah? And on the one hand, still repeating what I discussed towards the end of last week's class, on the one hand, you could argue that this modern science / technology is truly marvelous, or to put it more precisely, that it is something extremely powerful in the sense that it gives us, as mankind, hitherto unforeseen capabilities and powers. And think about the amount of wealth that we are able to create, the number of people that we are able to feed, at least potentially. Think about successes in struggle with various diseases, and so on and so forth. Flights to the space, internet, whatnot. All of this is marvelous. The problem, from Arendt's point of view, is that the development of modern science / technology appears to be, in a certain sense, automatic. We are not really in charge of it. It's just happening. It's transforming the world at ever faster pace. And we appear to be, but it's paradoxical because, of course, it's a product of human mind and of human ingenuity but at the same time, it became a process of its own, and we as human beings are somehow dragged by this process, which is something like a natural process, like a stream of water. And we can't do anything about it. Any single individual cannot really do anything about it. When you think about it, even the sort of way that science is being done, has become a sort of industrial process. It's not about individual genius scientists like, I don't know, Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein. Most of discoveries are done in these big teams working in huge institutions, mostly doing boring work, but together it slowly sort of pushes the limits further and further. Okay. And just as I said a couple of minutes ago, today I would like to, well, in some sense, look at the same process with Arendt from a different perspective, and then hopefully we'll arrive at some end as soon as possible. So, Arendt is that if we want to remind ourselves of the meaning of the political, or the essence of the political, perhaps, we, and at the same time, we want to understand what is actually happening to us, what is happening to this modern world that we have come to inhabit, the modern world that started appearing sometime around mid-20th century, and the world that we still live in. Paradox of Christians is that we have to sort of have a look back to, not to the future, but to the past. We need to go back to the roots of our civilization. If we want to understand what politics is about, we should look at time and place where democratic politics began, and where the actual word politics or politica was coined, and that is to take to ancient Greece, to ancient Athens. And here she takes a very, on the one hand from Aristotle, on the other hand from Greek historians like Thucydides, but she also her analysis of the human condition and importance of political action within it is also inspired by much later authors such as Karl Marx, as maybe will become apparent in a minute. And in her work on, in her book on the human condition, as well as other later work, she developed something that she calls articulation of the human activities, of those human activities that are not purely theoretical, that are practical in sense. And what is important to understand from the beginning is that what she is describing is not like anything purely subjective. She's rather trying to analyze various ways in which, through our actions, for what we are doing, are actually relating to other people and to the world. So in some sense, this is meant to be objective. It's in this sense. She comes up with this classification of the human activities into three basic types of activity. She calls labor, work, and action in the sense of political action. labor designates originally those activities that were by Aristotle and Greeks in general regarded as most slavish in their nature. Activities that are in one way or another related to the preservation of life. And that therefore corresponds to the biological aspect of our nature, because we as human beings, after all, are also animals that need to feed, that need to take care of their biological needs. We need some shelter from food, and we also need to reproduce. So we have children and we take care of them. So what is characteristic of these activities that fall under the category of labor is that on the one hand, they are absolutely necessary for our survival as individuals and as species. On the other hand, they are very, so to speak, unrewarding, and that's why they were regarded as lowest type of activities by the ancients. Because why? Because nothing remains after them. And when you think about it, we need to eat. So we need to take care of some fields to grow wheat on, and we transform that wheat into flour, make bread out of it, and then eat it. And that's it. And then the cycle starts again. These activities are cyclical in their nature. Think about like household chores. From time to time, people need to clean up their apartments. Yeah, even very messy people like myself. And so just spend like 2 hours like vacuuming and washing things and sort of tidying up the place, and then a couple of days later there's mess again, and it's an endless cycle. The next type of activities, is something that's very often confused with labor. And Arendt argues that Karl Marx, to some extent, was confusing labor and work, where on one hand he had a great deal of admiration for the creative potential of creative work. On the other hand, he regarded labor in modern factories as totally dehumanizing. Actually, the point is that these are, from the point of view of this phenomenological analysis, these are two different types of activities. By work, he means creative work. So you create something, and this can be a piece of furniture, for example, but it can also be a work of art. And what makes this different from the labor is it's not at least directly related, the products of work and the aim of work is not directly related to our physical biological necessities. In case of works of art, it's not related at all. Statues, pictures are not something that we would need, something that we like to admire. We don't need it to survive. But second and more importantly, these artifacts, these products of work actually survive. Bread is eaten. The cleaned apartment gets messy again, and that's the cycle. On the other hand, great works of art, for example, buildings, architecture, can survive for centuries, even millennia. They can survive their maker. The artist produces something that stays here even when the artist himself has passed away. And as Arendt puts it, to use her language or to use her approach, can say that these artifacts of human creation, of human creative capacity, work and make up the world that we inhabit, that we live in. because this is something that's quite interesting and quite unique about humans as a specific species, distinct from animals, that we actually consciously make up or create the world that we live in. We are part of nature as living beings, but at the same time, we are creating this artificial, man-made world that we put into, in a certain sense, in opposition to nature. You have like wild nature. Imagine some deep forest or jungle, and then humans build a city surrounded by walls in the middle of the jungle or the forest. And so there is this separation between the natural world, the nature, and this distinct man-made world. And when we live our lives, when we do things, but also when we try to understand things and understand the meaning of our lives, we are always relating ourselves to other things, to this human world, and we are just sort of orienting in this human world and doing things there and reflecting on it. So, and this human world, of course, is made up of, as was just said, of these made men things, or if you prefer, artifacts, the wall that surrounds the city, but also the buildings within it, the furniture, but also the statues and other works of art, and perhaps also music and things like that, or just artistic creation. But apart from that, this world is, of course, made up by us, or by relations between us as man, by what she calls the network of human relations, and also various institutions, including political institutions. And this takes us to the third type of human activity, and that would be action, in the sense of political action. It is very difficult to describe what we define political action, because unlike labor, which produces some physical stuff like bread, is however then eaten and is not remaining, and work, which produces more lasting artifacts, human action, acts of great statesmen, for example, do not really produce anything physical. Anything that would be visible, physical. But in a certain sense, what these acts and actions produce is a history, is a change, thoughts, events, major battles, revolutions, things like that. Yeah, and then when we think about it from the retrospect, we say, well, this is the history story that we talk about, that gives sense to the life of our nation, for example. And from what is interesting about political action is that, or what is interesting and but also variable about it, what is the reason according to Arendt why the ancient Greeks admired political action so much, why Aristotle regards politics together with philosophy or theory as the highest form of human life, is that it is through achievements in the field of politics that you as an individual can achieve, in a certain sense, immortality. In what sense? well, in the sense that Pericles achieved immortality. We still read about Pericles and we may still admire him. It's not that he would be able to defeat the ordeal of humans who, in contrast to the Olympian gods, are always mortal. But he achieved something for which he will be remembered and admired even after his death. Okay, but you could also say, that's what I think Arendt means, is that she shows that through action you can show who you really are. You can sort of reveal your true self, your true identity. Not in the sense that the identity would already be there, but through making some choices and through acting in one way or another, you're actually construing your identity. Therefore, in contrast to work, which allows you to show what you can do, work allows you to show who you really are. So it's very much related to your identity. And at the same time, action in the sense of political action can give you some sense of purpose, because it is through political action that you connect with your community and with the world in this sense of the network of human relations. Now, problem of our modern society that are characterized as mass society is that, as she puts it, it is becoming, or that has already become, a society of labor, or a society of laborers. It's very often described as consumers. Modern society and modern state of capitalism is very often described as consumer society. But of course, when you think about it, in order to be able to consume things, we need to produce them. So we are, on one hand, we really are consumers because we are buying things, and as I explained last week, we have to keep buying more and more things so that the economy could keep running and the GDP could keep rising. Yeah, but then these things need to be made. So we have this dual role in society. We need to keep spending money. For that, we need to make money. We have both laborers, consumers, and Arendt focuses on this laboring aspect in her analysis. In what sense are we a society of laborers? When you think about how she originally defines labor as these activities that are relating to our biological survival, like, I don't know, tilling fields, or taking care of household or of children, it makes absolutely no sense to describe our industrial or post-industrial society as laboring society. The portion of people who are actually employed in agriculture, for example, or in production of food stuff, is very small compared to the history. Well, but when you think about why the people work, what they achieve through their work, why people have their job. So most people just get jobs in order to make money, in order to make living. The reason why you need to make money is that you need to pay your bills to be able to live somewhere and to be able to eat something. That's the main reason why people are getting employed. And for many people, it's about the only reason. Apart from that, yeah, the type of activity that they do, whether they work as blue-collar workers in factory walls or as white-collar workers in some offices behind computers, the very character of this work has, again, can be described as being part of some large cyclical process of production and consumption. And moreover, insist that even when you look at politics, when you look at how our society as a whole is managed, what we consider to be important and consider not to be important. In politics, it's more and more about management of economy and sort of redistributing the economic wealth in society, but nothing else. We're just obsessed with economy. That's the most important thing. When you look at the elections, what people are interested in is how much taxes am I going to pay and what am I going to get in return, unless big politics gets into place, unless there is some war or something like that, then we suddenly realize that there are other things that yes.
Considering that everyone thinks that we're now in this kind of labor society, I find it interesting to kind of look at that and see the generation of people having to work all over the farm just to meet like housing, food, the basic securities. Would she agree that over time we're going to have less and less time in society to think about work and action? Are we going to start to see diminishing returns on that as we continue in the future?
Well, you know what, this is an interesting point because she has written this analysis in mid-1950s.
Yeah.
And at that time, she talks about people spending less time at work. Because until 1960s, even in the US, the amount of time people spent in work was declining and people are getting more and more free time. Which Marx, in his predictions, and basically argued, is in some texts, in Grundrisse, for example, that the future development of technology is going to lead to gradual automation of production, which essentially is going to free people from the necessity to spend their time doing mindless work in factories and will enable them to do something creative. And I would observe this and say, well, it's kind of funny because the first part of Marx's prophecy has fulfilled. Yeah, thanks to all these machines and gadgets we have at our disposal, people can work for 5 hours, for 5 days a week, and not for 6 days a week, and they can work for 8 hours a day instead of 12 hours a day. So we are really getting more and more free time that we could use for doing something creative and self-affirming. And yeah, for most people, this does not appear to be the case. Yeah, most people spend their free time just buying things, or buying services. So for 8 hours, you act as a laborer, you're making money, and then for next 8 hours, you are spending money. Yes.
Well, I'm not so sure it's so one-sided. In our time and age, having a hobby or doing something creative is as easy as you can get. I see it this way because it's easy right now. It's easier to self-publish than wherever in history. It's easy to get into cooking, drawing, as I mentioned, writing, and I'm not sure I'm the demographic, but most people I know have a hobby of some sort, which involves creating something.
Mm-hmm. I'll take another question, then I'll get back to you. Yes.
When she did it, like as technology has advanced, we require more and more stimulation, like just on your point to like energy and ourselves. So it was like I agree, it's so much easier to attain a hobby, but it's not really as hard to get the motivation to attain begin that hobby because like as we're on social media and as we're like moving so quickly in our world, like it's very easy to get distracted, or it's very easy to find a hobby that is stimulating you more. For example, like I find myself like wanting to sit on my phone for 2 hours when I get home instead of like doing something that I enjoy. I feel like that's just something that happens to a lot of people. Like drawing is amazing, it's so fun, but sometimes it's not even stimulating enough. I feel like for a lot of people, lots of hobbies are.
Yes, I guess that I agree with you that the technology that we are using keeps sort of taking up more and more of our time in a completely stupid ways. But this is of course something that Hannah Arendt could not predict. She's writing in the 1950s. Okay, but the point with hobbies is actually a good point. Yeah, and that's something that she also regards as a weakness of this Marxist prophecy, because for Marx, one of the selling points of this communist utopia, what he regarded as something positive, is that he would know that an individual in communist society would not be defined by his social role. So as he puts it, one place you could be, you could spend your morning fishing or hunting, and then in the afternoon you could draw some paintings, and in the evening you'd write some critiques or whatever. Yeah, you could do whatever just you find fulfilling. So an Arendt comments on it, and she says it's exactly like society of hobbies. But the problem with these hobbies is that they are hobbies that can also be called and are called pastimes. You are just passing time, doing something that you find enjoying, but you do not really connect by these activities, by these pastimes, precisely because they're, strictly speaking, private pastimes with other people. You do not connect with world. The biggest problem of man's society, according to Arendt, is subjectification of our existence, is losing a connection, a meaningful connection with the world. So when you, think about replacement of work with labor in something as mundane as production of furniture. When you imagine some old-fashioned pre-industrial artisan cabinet maker's shop, you have like one guy who's running the shop with perhaps like 2 or 3 helpers, and he takes basically the raw material, let's say wood, and transforms that into a piece of furniture, let's say a desk or a cabinet. So he has produced something. It's really transformed this matter into something meaningful and useful, and gave the matter the form, the idea that existed in his head on the drawing. And moreover, what is so he can first, he feels some sort of achievement that he has made this cabinet. And what is also important is that, or the desk, what's also important is that this furniture then bought by his customers, who can then admire him for being like really the best cabinet maker in the village or in the town, and recommend him. So it gives him a sense of meaning to his life. He gains recognition from others. When you just make some wooden stuff or wooden furniture for your own family or for yourself because you just enjoy doing it, you miss this aspect of recognition and of doing something that's needed by others. So it becomes purely private activity. That's how that's sort of direction from which she is looking at this. He also, yes,
So then in these sort of public versus private activities is where actually, like this is why, because she mentions in one part of the book that you don't, in a way, you don't own your actions, like you act in such a way that it goes and then you don't know where that will end.
mhm,
So then that is the importance of the public action then. So your actions sort of provoke more actions and more actions, and then that is what changed history, or how
well,
you perceive that?
yes, or you just relate to something that's going on through what you do. And then something comes out of it, but you can't predict what, and you can't, the sort of, your actions in the end make up the story of your life, but the story of your life is told by others after you're dead. You know, already Aristotle made this point, yeah, that well, that's the life is finished only with the dead, so we can judge the life and its achievements only after the agent passed away, because we can tell the story of his or her life. Yeah, does that make sense? And also, like since you asked this, to return to a point I was making before, this is not when she argues that through political action or correction you can show who you are. This is not to be read as endorsement of some more or less primitive sort of vision of identity politics or existentialism, where you're doing something in order to show what your true self is. No, there's no such thing as true self. That would already be there. You are becoming who you are through your life. So when you think about it, Arendt had great admiration for the people who fought against Nazis in the resistance movement in France from this movement. And in a certain sense, what they're doing was like a very good example of really free action, because they were not forced by anyone. They decided themselves that they want to do something in the name of some rather abstract principles, such as freedom and democracy, and they organized themselves in these groups and they fought against the Nazis. And today they are admired, after the war they were admired by people like Arendt, but most of their compatriots probably, as heroes. So if they did not take up arms and fight against the Nazis, nobody would admire them as heroes, but at the same time, you could not say that they were heroes. Yeah, so it's they by doing what they did, they were on the one hand showing who they are, but at the same time becoming who they are. It's not like you have. It's not like it would be. No, it would be misleading to construe this in the sense that you have some true self and action just gives you a way of showing to the world what this true self is. You are really becoming who you are through what you are doing. And at the same time, you are showing it to others. Because after all, in our world, in human world, what truly is and what appears are to some extent the same thing. Okay, just to. I thought we get this from yet another perspective, and then we'll finish the story and of Hannah Arendt, and we'll be able to move on to Jürgen Habermas. It is like really. So one of the problems of our modern society is not just this modern world. The other side I showed you in half the 20th century, also it development started much earlier with the advent of modernity or social modernization. Well, one of the characteristics of this modern society is that it's so obsessed with economic growth, as was already discussed. Modern society, as Arendt puts it, is in fact an oxymoron. Society is modern invention society in the sense that Hegel talks about. In the Greek classical Greek sense, the good distinction was being made between the polis and oikos. Polis is what is public, oikos is what is private, oikos in household. Polis can be translated, often translated state, as in the city state. In a certain sense, it's in a English translation, by state, we usually mean the governmental institutions, sort of apparatus of the state. And we distinguish state from society, that the people who live in this. And it was Hegel who made this observation that this is something deeply modern, that in the ancient world, in Greek city-state or in ancient Roman Republic, it would make absolutely no sense to make a distinction between society and state. It is a modern distinction. So modern society is as old as the state, and society, or as he also called it, civil society, consists mostly of what he calls a network of needs. Society is a space in which people engage in economic activities, in other words. And that's just so. And one of the signs that something new has emerged is the emergence of this new term that we encountered in 18th century, and perhaps already before that, already 17th century, I'm quite sure, 17th, 18th century, we saw political economy. Political economy sounds like, what? It's an oxymoron. Because in the Greek world, economy, oikonomia, means something that can be described as the art or practice of household management. It derived the word from oikos. So the household, of course, consists not only of like the nuclear family, husband, wife, and children, but then there are also servants, slaves, and then there is some property. There are some fields, or perhaps some art workshop, or some business. After all, Athens was a big export-import center, trade center. So as the head of the household, you need to be capable of managing also this property. Economic activity, in other words, are happening in private, in the sphere of household. And as you remember from Aristotle, Aristotle knows and keeps repeating over and over from various points of view that these economic activities are servile, are placed lower than political activities. There's some necessary. We need to be able, if you want to become not to survive, but to become like successful in your community, if you want to be admired by your fellow citizens, you need to be able to make some money. But you should not turn this into the end of your life. Yeah, because money is just an instrument that you need to achieve something else. And what you should focus on, according to Aristotle, would be political action. Political action takes place not in the household, but in the public, in agora, where the people meet and discuss public affairs, where you can, as a free citizen, it's just like less than half or less than quarters to some point of time of population, because women are out of the game, so it's out of the game, or it's out of the game. But with this privilege, male citizens can play this role, that they are not only heads of family, but they are also free citizens that are equal to other citizens and can be part in deliberation and decision making. And what has happened in modernity is that these economic activities have somehow moved largely out of households into factories and other places, into what we call society or civil society, as this area of where business is being done. And then we have a state by which we mean laws and law enforcing institutions and all this bureaucracy that actually somehow manages what society does and manages just different ways to do that. And in Arendt's language, she also puts it by this strange phrase that the social has replaced or overshadowed the political. And when we think about what is public to us, is the social. And that is to say, concern for our common well-being, political economy, mostly. But society also cannot be reduced just to making business. Society also means something like, or originally meant something like, polite society, originally of the royal courts and later on bourgeois society, which is polite, therefore demands certain manners, demands that you behave in some way that is predictable. And in mass society, these polite manners are being replaced by different types of programming of individuals through commercial stuff, public relations, and so on and so forth. Education, it's not. To continue in this topic with when we talk about Foucault. Okay. It all sounds rather. But then, strangely enough, Arendt also looks at what's going on in modern times, and she regards that at least at certain occasions, at least periodically, people can actually engage in what could be described as authentic political action. But at least at certain times, there are windows of opportunity where you can suddenly show who you are by making some choice and by acting, and by really changing the course of history, rather than just being part of this mess that's just moving in one direction of progress and modernization. She thinks of such, already mentioned one of these sort of events, or the resistance movement in occupied Europe, but she also thinks about the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, or more peaceful things like civil rights movement in the United States in 1960s. So on one hand, she argues that, well, our modern democracy is really does not give citizens much of opportunity to participate in political deliberation and decision making. In this sense, it's not real democracy. Just elect some professional politicians who basically make living out of politics and who perhaps serve either this or that social group in their economic interests. But otherwise, for most of us, engagement in politics is really limited to going to elections every couple of years. No. We are society players, yeah. But at the same time, she then realizes, and she finds this rather optimistic, that at some point of time we can actually do more. We can join some protest movement and try to achieve something by organizing ourselves. So what is interesting is that she, in the end, you could say that she basically arrives at the conclusion that in modern democracy, like in democracy that she came to inhabit, that became her adopted homeland in the 1940s during the war, does provide or can potentially provide a room for authentic political action in which anyone, not just elected politicians, can participate. But it's not through these. This room is not defined by these institutions like Congress and presidency and the courts. This room is rather located in what is often also called civil society. In other words, third sphere of people organizing themselves and acting in various civil movements, such as civil rights movement. What you can say is that she also realized that the institutions of liberal democracy are important precisely because they protect this space. Yeah? The freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, rule of law are something that's very important, in part because it provides some protection for citizens who disagree with government and want to challenge the government, and sometimes they are actually successful, which is actually quite wonderful. And she also, by the way, notes that from the point of view of the individuals, numerous individuals who participated in, for example, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, that in the end was defeated by Soviet troops, or by those who participated in the civil rights movement in the United States, which in the end was successful to a great extent. That what is interesting is that these individuals, similar to those anti-Nazi resistance fighters, find this experience extremely enriching, regardless of the fact that they achieved what they strive for or not in the end. Just engagement for them is just engaging in something that's meaningful and that sort of transcends their own private interests. They are, by joining some political movement like this, by doing something, you suddenly are reconnecting with the world and with society, and that gives some real meaning to your life. And she knows that the people who have experienced this really have this kind of experience. Suddenly I'm part of something and I'm doing something important and meaningful, and it is wonderful in and of itself. Some years ago, and I no longer have this article, unfortunately, I will have to locate it. I just read this interview with one of Czech politicians who still is around, but he was more active in the 1990s, and more importantly, he was very active during the communist years in the resistance movement, in the dissident movement. And he was giving he was like part in an interview that he gave where he was asked about the experience of these dissident or resistance activities under communism, what it meant for him and for people around him. And he said it was like it was the most immediate experience of living truly freely, living a truly free life, which is paradoxical because he was because they were being chased by the secret police, they were being interrogated, periodically imprisoned, and things like that. They are living in society that cannot be described as free society, but it's because they turned against this system, against the regime, and they were trying to change it and create some room for freedom, that they could truly experience, as you put it, the real and most authentic experience of free life. So that sort of plays into what she talks about. And yes.
Like, would you argue, like, would you think that Arendt argues that what we're mostly lacking in today's society, modern society, is action, like in the type of human activities? And that is why we, I mean.
Well, that's like part of the argument, but is that we do not completely lack some space or opportunity for political action, but that it appears only occasionally, only periodically. But when what she's trying to do is trying to give you some. She's trying to come up with what can be described as diagnosis of the time that she's living in, of the problems of late modern society. And the main point that she makes is that in the core of these problems, or the main problem, the main reason for why people, he argues that, okay, she is a phenomenologist, so her starting point is how we perceive them, how we perceive them. And she argues that from this point of view, from the point of view of the experience of members of modern mass society, what is typical, what are typical sort of feelings, or what is typical experience is feeling that you are in a sense alone, that you are lonely. You don't have enough connection to others because you are part of this mass. You are replaceable in your job, for example. You are doing some job, but you know that you're replaced by some other worker with the same qualification. Since there is this feeling of loneliness and of being just a replaceable part of some social machine. And she notes that this phenomenon is often described since Rousseau and then Marx as self-alienation, which is somehow as a part of society, as a part of the social mechanism, you disconnect from your true self. But she reverses this. She argues that more apt description than self-alienation is world alienation, that we are becoming disconnected from others and from the world in a meaningful sense. And that is for her, it is through being connected to others, through world expression, for example, that we are gaining some identity and some self. Does that make sense?
No, I'm just, because I'm a bit sometimes about like the definition of like society of laborers,
Mhm.
and like because if that means that like we're satisfying living needs. But we still also have to acknowledge that living needs have changed the past centuries.
Mhm.
So like, I think it's a bit simplistic to call it labor. No, like to say that. Because we're actually, as we said already, we're like doing something we're disconnected from, so we're not making food, we're not. I don't know, going to get water somewhere, we're actually going to an office.
Okay, so yes, so it's not labor in the original sense. It's some derived form of labor in the sense of taking care, making living by making money. So that makes it even worse. Yes, that is. And you know, apart from that, there are some. But there are some limitations to our analysis because she looked at she died in mid-1970, before 1975, I'm not 100% sure now. And because she did not predict, some people most of those came after, so she notes that. You know, she's one of political theorists who lived in the Cold War, who basically, at least to some extent, focused toward the societies in the East and in the West have in common. The Cold War was defined by this division, two different ideologies, two different economic and political systems, and there was a big division. He's one of the people who look at the problem and say, well, perhaps. If you look below the surface, you'll find out that these two societies have a lot in common. Yeah, because they're both late modern technological societies that can also be described as nice societies. Both being defined by technology, and technology is ideologically blind, so to speak. It's universal. And at the same time, she lived at a time when as I already mentioned, the people are getting more and more free time, even in the United States. In Europe, it continued afterwards. In the United States, people just got crazy and decided that they don't like shopping as much as staying in the office and that they want to work more. Yeah. And people work more hours today than they worked in the 1970s, which doesn't make much sense, but it is the case. And related to that is another trend that she did not predict. Until early 1970s or so, or mid-1970s at least. Rather, yeah, mid-1970s at least. The economic inequality was declining in the West. The differences between the rich and the poor was slowly but steadily getting smaller and smaller. So, and at the same time, yeah, so after the Second World War, the members of the industrial working class, at least part of them, in automobile workers in Detroit, could suddenly, for the first time in history, afford a lifestyle that resembled the lifestyle that used to be reserved for the middle class, owning a house in the suburbs, owning an automobile, being able to spend like 2 weeks at least a year on some family holiday somewhere. So in 1960s, Arendt also makes some claims to this point, but others, the theorists like Daniel Bell, basically argue that it appears that Western society, at least the economically most developed Western societies like American society, are becoming classless societies. That the differences between both social classes were becoming smaller and smaller, so they're using either classless society or middle class society. The middle class was becoming bigger and bigger, and almost everyone could consider himself to be a part of the middle class. Yeah, and then there were just tiny, like smaller and smaller fringes on both sides that were not really part of the public, the very rich or the very poor. But it appeared that there was this trend towards study becoming more egalitarian and in a certain sense classes. But we know that since then this has changed. Since late 1970s, we have observed the exact opposite trend. In the sense that the difference between the rich and the poor started growing again at quite fast speed, and middle class has started becoming, membership in middle class, so to speak, started becoming something less and less secure. So that's something that she did not take into account. She also does not pay much attention to the differences between the North and the South, between the global North and global South, and problems related to this global organization of labor. But again, it is understandable because she died in the mid-1970s, so just about a decade or less than a decade after the 1960s, after decolonization, the decade of decolonization. After all, Portugal did not give up its colonies until the mid-1970s, and the new stage of, well, was sometimes described as post colonialism was just starting at that point of time. It's in the 1970s when you have the new wave of post Second World War wave of what is called the economic globalization, during which the industrial production starts moving to the countries of the global South. And on the other hand, the most industrial countries are becoming deindustrialized. Factories are being closed down in the United States and later on also some European countries, and now are being moved to third countries with cheaper labor. So the sort of 19th century relation or between the capitalists and the workers, the exploitation of the labor of the workers has moved from being a problem of like individual capitalist societies to a problem that is in a certain sense of a global nature, if that makes sense. And that's again something that you cannot have predicted. And that's again something that we live with. Well, you know what, perhaps if you wanted to take off something meaningful from her analysis, you could perhaps say, or that's my approach, is that, well, what could be the aim of political action today? Or what should we be concerned if we want to live freely? Well, perhaps it is, again, as she described it, this domination of our societies by economy, and it's obvious that not just some anonymous economic system, it is global capitalism. Perhaps that if you are concerned with democracy and with freedom, you should be concerned with this and various aspects of this relation. Okay, and still have about 5 minutes left, but I think that I'm officially announcing that we are a week behind schedule, and we will focus on Habermas next week. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so. The thing is. I still think like, okay, like we said, like it's contextual, so yeah, she lived in a specific time and she was seeing something happening and then it didn't progress as she thought maybe, like, I don't know. Well, not so extreme, differences in the world. But at the same time, like the trend was still automatization and like technological progress and like people actually being detached from their labor, right? Like from their work. So like
Yes.
so like I when I was reading her, I found it really interesting how she like talk like how she divides human activities.
Mhm.
And, like my mind immediately goes to yes, we're not doing labor anymore. We're not like, or at least we're not like the things that we actually consume, the way we satisfy their biological needs are not through our own labor, like the labor of other people. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think, okay, maybe this is gonna be a critique of work. Because we're actually working, like we're
But
creating.
that's not what she means by work. Work is the authentic creative activity. So the meaning, so this what the, so I'll describe it as like the original meaning of these activities, let's say, yeah. But in the technologically structured world and society of these categories or the actual meaning of these activities has changed. So most people just do some completely depersonalized and frankly meaningless type of work / labor to make living. They just go to some offices and type some figures into Excel sheets and things like that. Completely alienating type of labor. Yeah. But Clara says it's labor, it's not work. You're not really creating something that would be your work, that you would be proud of. Actually, in today's world, very few people engage in what can be described as work in the sense of creative work in this phenomenological sense of the word. It's more or less only artists.
I mean,
Because the production of these things and these things, buildings, yeah, has become industrialized. It's part of this like machinery of industrial production. So it's part of this socialized labor, quote unquote. Does that make sense?
I still think like we play a part in work, you know, like if it's like creating artificial objects, you know. So like, you know, a lot of what we consume is actually artificial objects, and they're gonna stay. They're staying. So isn't that?
Are they staying? Are they filling
I mean,
landfills?
they are in landfills where they still exist.
Well, yeah, so they don't exist in their original form and sense, yeah,
But
because they are consumer goods that are being consumed. Yeah, well, originally what was consumed was like bread and metals. Yeah, today we talk about cars and refrigerators as consumer goods, something with a limited and ever shorter lifespan that needs to be consumed so that a new type of car or telephone could be bought by the consumers. So in this sense, yeah, we are creating when you know what is from the point of view of your individual doer's connection to the world, what was initially important about work and what was distinguishing it from action was that it creates something that lasts here, that lasts longer than yourself. That So the word, I think about Michelangelo's David, yeah, still standing there in front of Uffizi in Firenze, and we can still go there and admire this statue. Well, 500 centuries after the author is dead. If you work in apple factory somewhere in China or India now, because you don't make anything, you're just part of this gigantic process. You have an ant hill, but together the ants produce these cell phones that are then sold, and 4 years or 5 years or whatever later end up on landfill. Nothing remains. So
No,
it's a,
but it's there, like just because someone that didn't trust Michelangelo's artwork, it doesn't mean that it's the same, I think it's the same process. It's still there. It's still an artificial object that is part of the world.
well, it's just some material, it's just broken down, or maybe it's recycled,
Yeah,
part of them are recycled.
mostly not recycled, but
Yeah, but they're not, but it's not the original artifact. And the buildings that make up European cities, the centuries-old buildings, and they maybe have been refurbished and changed, but they are still there. The streets had often the same shape, the buildings have the same shape, so it is something lasting, something that also gives us a sense of connection with the history. iPhones don't give me sense. Give a sense of connection with history.
I mean, a lot of other things that are in the city don't give me a sense of connection to history, but like, I still think it's the same process, and I think like. The point wouldn't be to go back to actually doing work, the point would be to go back to doing actual labor, which means you're actually providing for yourself. You know,
Oh,
because
The main difference is personalization. When Michelangelo created his work, it's his work. When you create an iPhone on a factory, just an iPhone, you don't feel.
but that's not the issue I'm talking, it's like honest, like, sorry, I just.
okay.
I'm talking about.
Okay, so Aaron, Aaron is concerned with the disconnection of individuals from the world, or alienation of individuals from the world, and that is concerned with alienation of individuals from nature.
Yeah. But like, I think that's the world, no?
No, it's not. It has two different things. They are somehow interconnected, but only somehow interconnected. Because we are animals, but we are something other than animals at the same time.
Yes,
Absolutely.
but I also think like most people are actually able to create a creative work, and we still do it. It's just, work is not actually something creative anymore.
Mhm.
So, or like most of work is not creative anymore.
Okay, that's why Aaron calls labor. You just have to admit that sometimes you have a problem thinker that creates his own categories or his own vocabulary. If you want to understand it, you usually have to accept it. And there is only very little point in saying I just don't like the fact that she uses a label word for this thing because I would use for something else.
I don't think it's for that, but.
Okay, we have to be continued. Okay.